Ever since I was little, I always dreamed of living abroad. The idea of leaving my home country to explore the world, meet new people, and discover new cultures was always very exciting to me. And I especially remember being like 13 years old and telling my parents that once I graduated from high school, I would just pack up all my suitcases and I would move to France and I would never go back to my home country. Lo and behold, I did not move to France just right after graduating high school, but I did go on a little 2-year long adventure to work and live in different countries in Europe and also Asia. In total, I actually traveled to 26 different countries around the world, lived in 8 for at least 2 months, and now I have been living in France for the past 4 months, which is the longest time that I have ever been living in a country which isn't my home country. And so after being an expat for more than 8 years, I wanted to make this video for future expats to tell you that living abroad as a foreigner is not what you think it is. In this video, I'm going to share with you the ugly, dark sides of living life as an expat in order to maybe help you decide if you're in the middle of pondering the idea of maybe moving abroad, whether or not expat life is indeed for you, or if it's something that you should absolutely not do. And in that case, I hope that this video will save you the trouble and the time of moving abroad only to discover that you actually don't like it. Let's start this video. I feel like expat living has become more and more popular in recent years. I feel like after COVID, everybody was just kind of like,
fuck my home country,
wherever their home country is.
I'm moving abroad.
Don't you think any job interview?
And thanks to all of these special, unique, weird jobs, such as a digital nomad or an online business owner, I think that nowadays more and more people want to move abroad while also working for themselves. But is it really worth it? Is moving abroad really worth it? Let's see. The first thing I want to talk about when it comes to being an expat is this feeling of not really belonging anywhere. Ever since I started living abroad at 18 years old, I always had this feeling of just not really belonging anywhere 100%, just not having a home that I can relate to 100%. And it's a really hard feeling to deal with, but let me explain what this feeling means. So I'm from Hungary, right? I lived there until I was 18, but since I was 22, I only lived in France. Therefore, these days, whenever I go back to Hungary for the holidays, I don't feel at home. I feel very disconnected from the people, from the culture. I'm not even really up to date with the news, to be honest. There are even things that I really don't want to know about, like politics and all of that. So I just don't relate to the culture in general. Now on the other side, when I'm in France, I also don't feel 100% at home here. Like, I feel at home here in the sense that it is my chosen home. It is the country that I always wanted to live in. I studied and worked here, and I'm definitely more familiar with what's going on the political arena here. But at the same time, since I wasn't born here, it's hard for me to feel like a local here. And the number one reason why I still just feel like an expat rather than a citizen or a local here is because French people still make me feel like a foreigner here. The moment I open my mouth and start speaking French, French people are literally like, ah, tu as un bel accent. Ah, tu viens de Budapest. Budapest, c'est la Bulgarie, non? Ah non, désolé, c'est la Roumanie. I'm not saying that they're mean or that they're doing this on purpose. I think they're kind of doing this without being aware of how they're making me feel like. To be honest, in general, I think there are not a lot of countries where locals really treat foreigners like one of them. I think most countries where expats are living in their country really treat them as someone who is there but who's not really part of their culture, if you know what I mean. So the next thing I want to talk about is having multiple cultural identities. If you have already lived abroad yourself, you've probably noticed that after a while you just started to develop a very hybrid, very hybrid, diversified cultural identity. This means that when you start living abroad, after a while, you just start to absorb and integrate the behavioral patterns, the way people talk, cultural norms of your host country into your own personality and into your own personal cultural identity. For example, in my case, I have 2 distinct personalities based on where I live. And no, I'm not schizophrenic, but I do have 2 identities based on where I live. I have my French expat in France, foreigner living living in France identity, which is a very introverted identity. She's very shy. She doesn't talk that much, mostly because she's not that comfortable talking in French because she makes a lot of mistakes. That's me. My French personality just loves to complain whenever the weather is bad. My French personality also loves to procrastinate, and she loves to jaywalk. Like that's what she does. She jaywalks. Now on the other side, my Hungarian personality is a whole different thing. My Hungarian personality never ever complains. She is a bit cold before you get to know her. She's also very loud and extroverted when you actually become her friend. She talks very, very fast, mainly because she's talking in her native language. So she is finally able to talk to someone. My Hungarian personality also loves to wake up early, go to sleep early, get things done as fast as possible. And also she never ever jaywalks because it's against the rules in Hungary to jaywalk. But can you see the difference? It's just a really weird thing to have like two different personalities based on where you live. But I think that once you move abroad and start living abroad as an expat, it's literally impossible not to copy and integrate and absorb the habits of the people in your host country, in your new country. People are like monkeys, like we see and we do, we don't really think. The next thing I want to talk about is health concerns. Okay, so this is definitely something that I never thought that I would ever have to worry about when I moved abroad. But living abroad alone and getting sick is like the worst combo ever. No matter where you live, getting sick is always, of course, super uncomfortable, and it makes you feel very vulnerable and very alone and isolated. But when you live abroad as an expat and you get sick, in addition to being sick, you're also responsible for yourself. That means that you have to figure out a way to find a doctor, get an appointment, get health insurance, finance your medical expenses, get medicine, and it can be extremely stressful, especially if you live in a country that doesn't have universal health care, the US. And on the top of all of that, when you get sick abroad, you also have to be able to understand the language that the doctor is speaking so that you know what to do. And this happened to me before, where I got sick, I had some stomach issues, and I had to go to the doctor because I was feeling really bad, and because I wasn't that good in French yet, I didn't really understand what the doctor was saying exactly in French. So I kind of just assumed that he was correct, and I just took the medicine and prayed for salvation, to be honest. If this ever happens to you, by the way, if you get sick while living abroad in a foreign country, I really advise you to like join a Facebook group where other expats living in your new country can give you information about English speaking doctors where you live. I think it's super useful. When you don't have anybody to rely on, it, you can feel very lonely and isolated and just like abandoned. Now let's talk about language barriers. I think that one of the biggest challenges that most foreigners face when they move abroad is not being able to speak the country's language and therefore feeling very isolated. This of course depends on where you move, because I know that there are many countries where the population speaks really good English. Like for example, if you move to the Netherlands, Hong Kong, Sweden, Germany, etc., England, of course, I don't think that you would have a hard time getting around and making friends in English, because people do speak very good English in these countries as well. But there are also countries like France or Italy or China that I used to live in, where people don't speak that good English, and therefore it's really hard to make friends with locals if you don't speak their language. Not being able to speak the language is not only a problem when it comes to making friends, but it can also cause a huge problem when it comes to administration and getting things done. Sometimes understanding the paperwork and the legal and administrational stuff of your new country can be super stressful if you don't speak the local language. Even me, like sometimes I receive documents from like the French like tax thing, like French taxes, and I'm looking at the papers, I'm trying to read it, and I'm literally like,
I don't understand.
like it's extremely stressful. Homesickness. Honestly, I never met an expat who never felt homesick. I think that being an expat and feeling homesick kind of goes hand in hand. To be fair, homesickness is an emotion that everybody can experience. It doesn't only apply to expats. You can feel homesick even if you still live in your home country, but maybe you moved out. But I think that especially for expats, homesickness is a feeling that never really goes away and that is very present in expats' everyday life. When homesickness hits expats, we suddenly start longing for familiar sights, sounds, smells, the comfort of our loved ones, and it's a very painful, aching emotion that never never really goes away, and that is really hard to deal with because you cannot really do anything about it. Like, of course, you can soothe it temporarily, like by calling a family member or by eating something from your home country. But I think once all of those like temporary soothings end, you just start feeling homesick again, and it's just a feeling that is always kind of there. I also noticed that homesickness have different levels. How homesick I get really depends on what's going on in my life. When it's the winter time, like November, December, just before the holidays, I tend to get really homesick and I really want to go home. I also tend to get quite homesick when I'm feeling very anxious and down and stressed in my life. However, I almost never feel homesick when it's the summer and I'm going on vacation, or when I'm not working, I don't have school and I can do whatever I want. I usually don't feel homesick. So since I think that homesickness depends on how happy you are, these days, instead of trying to like find ways to go home, or instead of longing for home, I'm just trying to control how happy I am, and I'm trying to do things that make me happy no matter where I am in the world, because that's ultimately the only thing that I can control. Since I made the choice not to live in my home country, now my happiness is completely in my control. It's not living in any country that will make me ultimately happy. It's me who's gonna make myself happy. Missing your family and missing out on important events. Okay, so another thing that I never really thought about before moving abroad was how many things I would actually miss out on by leaving my home country, and some of them are very scary. Like, for example, I never thought that for one day I would have to worry so much about whether or not my grandparents are still gonna be there when I go back to my home country. And this also applies to like positive events, not just bad ones. But for example, when something good happens in my family, like somebody buys a house or somebody moves apartments, I cannot really be there to help them or celebrate with them. Also, if you grow up with a sibling, for example, I think it can be really hard sometimes to see them grow up but not being there physically. For example, every time I go back to my home country and I see my sister, I'm like, oh my god, like you look so different, like your body looks different, your face looks different, and it's just really weird not being able to like be there and see how people evolve in your family. Career challenges. This is another thing that I never thought that I would ever have to worry about before I moved abroad, but actually seeking career opportunities in a different country as an expat can be super challenging too. First of all, if you don't speak the local language, it can be hard to find a job, because no matter how skilled you are, your employers are always gonna privilege people who speak the language of their customer, and if the language of their customer is the local language of the country that you just moved in, they're gonna take someone who speaks the local language better than you. Another thing is that when you work or study abroad, you might sometimes feel like you have to work extra hard to gain credibility and recognition. Like, I had this feeling when I was studying in France that I had to work 5 times more and 5 times harder than my French classmates because I'm a foreigner and this is not my native language, so I have to work extra hard and prove myself to the country, to the people of this country, in order to gain recognition and validation. When you're working as an expat, sometimes you will have to work harder and longer to establish professional credibility, and sometimes you will really have to put in a lot more work than the native speakers of your new country do, because that's just the name of the game, and this can feel kind of unjust at times, to be honest. Working abroad is also not the easiest. With all these challenges being said, I also want to say that living abroad is an extremely enriching and unique experience, and also a privilege that a lot of our ancestors didn't have, a lot of the generations before us didn't have. So I think that our generation is extremely lucky in that regard, that we can just take a plane, travel to a new country and settle down there and live there and get to know a whole new culture, while also still being connected to our home country through social media and technology. So even though there are many challenges to living life as an expat abroad, and it's definitely very hard at times, I truly believe that these hardships can really make us grow and can really make us become more resilient, flexible, adaptable, and living abroad can really help us to become a better version of ourselves. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. And if you're planning on moving abroad and you're interested in learning a new language, make sure to watch this video next.